My name is Marcus Coleman. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for Hamilton County Job and Family Services. Today we have a very special guest. We have a very knowledgeable guest, and we're going to discuss a very important topic, grief and grief management. Um, Good afternoon, Sheila. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone something about your background?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. As he said, my name is Shelia Smith. I'm the founder and executive director of Koinonia Education and Family Resource Center in Akron, Ohio. I have been certified as a grief recovery method support specialist since 2012 and have experience in both one-on-one and group grief support. The mission and vision of Koinonia is to promote community wellness through education. I've been a member here in the Akron area for 34 years after moving from Youngstown, Ohio. I've worked over 20 years with families and children with case management and currently a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate for children with Summit County Juvenile Court, and also a licensed ordained minister at the House of the Lord here in Akron, Ohio.
Okay, outstanding. Now, we're talking about grief, and I'm very sure that just as I would have, we've heard the term grief, and people just assume they know what it means. But just from my conversation with you, I know it's much more expansive than that. You want to give people an idea of what we're talking about when we say grief, what that actually means.
Mhm. Well, it's one of the subjects that we definitely stay away from in our Western world, looking at grief or people's reaction to loss. But I feel that we need to normalize grief because it is the normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. Therefore, the feelings that we may have or are having are also normal and natural. And you're not, most of the times, people feel in that grief process that they're actually going crazy, but it's not so much a broken head as much as it is a broken heart.
Mm.
While grief is normal and natural and clearly the most powerful of all emotions, it is also, as we said, the most neglected and misunderstood experience, often by the grievers and those around them. And we all have been ill prepared to discuss grief or understand what grief is about because it's a very deep, heartfelt emotion. And like I said before, sometimes we feel like we're losing our mind, but that's just a part of that process because it is clearly a very powerful emotion. And most of the time, when we talk in terms of grief, we think about, the death of a loved one or even a divorce or relationship issues. But grief is much more than that. And I have on, if you could pull up slide number 5, we have listed losses that people don't really really see as grief issues. And the one that there's like 40 different kinds of losses that we experience in our life. But today, for today's purpose, I'm thinking in terms of what we're discussing with wellness in our community, in our families, and which is has been a definite grief issue that we are experiencing in our communities. The dysfunctionalities that cause grief, fatherlessness, adoption, foster care, all of those things affect our lives in very painful ways. And that's why I entitled the presentation, Grief is Pain. Just like when we go to the doctor's office and they ask you a question, what's your pain level? I would like to see us come up with a gauge for what is our grief level, because there are things in our lives that we just look over and not really see those as grief issues. But from my personal experience, taking the grief recovery program that we had at our church, I was going because, first of all, I'll say this too, that sometimes as African Americans, we don't seek counseling on things. We kind of maneuver our lives around, counseling and that. But at our church, before you can be involved in any ministry in the church, you had to go through the grief recovery. So I went through it because that was what they asked us to do. And I said, well, let me go and get this done. But I have been forever grateful to go through that process because we had the opportunity, and we'll see that later, is to go through our lost history graph, the LOSS, lost history graph, and just really detail all of the losses that have occurred other than death and everything, loss of security, not having a relationship with Father. All of those things were listed out, and I had to list those out. And I said, I came because, I thought I needed to go through this process for the loss of my mother. But I realized that there was more losses in my life. And as I looked at those, I can compare some of the things that have occurred in my life, wrong decisions. And it was all because I hadn't dealt with the pain that was in my heart. So I'm really a proponent of being able to identify losses in our lives so we could be able to be fully present to do what we need to do in life.
You said something I thought was very interesting. You talked about African Americans and the reluctance that we demonstrate at times that we have with just acknowledging the emotion. I can remember my grandmother would have this phrase, and she would just say, "Oh, my nerves is bad." And I now wonder if she was talking about something that was an undiagnosed and untreated emotional kind of thing that she was going through, or something that we just didn't have the vocabulary for at that time. Yeah.
And that's very true because, I'm from the generation of, I was born in 1954, the year of Brown versus the Board of Education. And at that time, I was living, I was born and raised in a little town called Asheville, North Carolina. And at that time, we were still in segregation. So I did not attend school with white children until I was at the 6th grade. So up until then, we were nestled in our community, all black teachers, all black schools, all of that. And I believe we missed the mark in somewhat with integration because we lost our community identity. And thinking in terms of your grandmother and thinking in terms of my mother, what their generations had to go through was grief. And a lot of it was just, they would handle it through church, through religion. But, and that's good and all, but being able to identify what that pain is, and the recovery method is to identify that pain so you can say goodbye to that. It no longer holds you hostage.
Right. What about children? What do we know about children experiencing grief and how early it might manifest itself in their lives?
Well, I don't have any data regarding that, but I do have observations.
Okay.
I currently work helping my cousin out with her daycare center, and I'm with the 3 to 5-year-olds, and I'm telling you that those kids are experiencing some things that are making them at that young age act out in ways that people would not believe, and we don't want to label them. We don't want to label them early, but we see some things with the anger outbursts.
Yes.
The inability to get along with each other, and we're trying to teach those skills to them. But the problem is sometimes when they go home and all of that stuff that we taught is unwound.
Yeah.
they go back into their situation.
It sounds
But
like what you're saying. I can see that. I taught junior high school for 7 years. I can see that coming out in the behavior in the classroom
mm-hmm,
sometimes.
mm-hmm,
What the kids come into the classroom with from home, and also what we're
mm-hmm.
seeing on most of our city streets and most of our major cities, and the
Yes.
violence that we're seeing. What's the connection there as far as your observations have demonstrated to you?
Well, up until I did some training with the adverse childhood experiences,
Hmm.
I really uh, couldn't really identify or put a name to those actions. But once I went through a training on the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, I began to understand, be able to identify some of those things that are causing some issues with our kids. So when you look at how these adverse childhood experiences are defined, there are two categories: acts of commission and acts of omission.
Right.
Under the acts of commission, we see child abuse, such as words or overt actions that cause harm, potential harm, or threat of harm. And then we have physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse under that acts of commission. And then those acts of omission, and this is what I've learned through dealing with being a CASA for Summit County Juvenile Court, that child neglect, failure to provide needs to protect from harm or potential harm, physical, emotional, medical, dental, educational neglect, and inadequate supervision and exposure to violent environments. And I'm seeing the young children. I have observed reactions or interactions with moms sometimes that are so dismissive, even calling kids names,
Yes.
that they, and
Yeah.
they come and that our kids they're sponges and they're taking in all of this stuff, and it comes out, in their interactions with other children.
Yeah. Something you said just a few moments ago that I thought was interesting is
Hmm.
all of the interventions that you might use with children in school, but then they go back
Hmm.
home to the same environment, which may have
Yeah.
created the very adverse childhood experiences that you're talking about. So it
Yes.
almost seems as if you're not only having to try to deal with the child's awareness, but also with the awareness of the individuals in the child's home as well.
Yes. Yes. And that's one of the things that we talked about as grief specialists, that we need to have more conversations in our communities around grief and what grief is. Because we don't really understand it. We see it in one context, and I say again, in the context of losing someone to death,
Right.
or that's when we talk about it. But there's many other causes of grief in our lives. It is not from the loss of a person, but like we said, loss of security, the ability to not have any connections with your father or mother. And it's so much going on in our community now, in this new phenomenon of grandparents raising grandchildren.
Yes.
And as a grandmother, I could understand the emotional stress that these grandparents are going through, because they have raised their children, and now I know of one family lost a mom to COVID, with left 6 children,
Wow.
and the grandmother and father are left with that. But could you imagine the stress that goes with that?
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm sure that kind of comes out in presentation to the children.
Yeah.
So we need to address that, but to have that awareness of what grief is, and to have the understanding that there's help there. You identify what that loss is, and then we can work through that. you have the opportunity to really verbalize what that pain is. And we say that grief is, is due to not being able to say what you need to say about your loss, and being able to say it without judgment or someone putting you down.
I'm glad you
I
said that.
believe yes.
I'm glad you said that because I can recall being a little boy and we were not allowed to cry. And you may have an uncle who will
Oh,
say, "Oh, shut up! You're not a little girl. You're not supposed to cry." And so
uh-huh.
to me, that's the genesis of learning as a boy, and then later a man, to suppress your
Mm-hmm.
feelings. Do you see a difference in
Yes.
how boys and young men respond to grief recovery versus how girls and women respond to it? Do you notice anything different there?
Well, and just dealing with with doing the groups in around grief,
And the
it
willingness
is
and
mostly,
openness about talking about it.
yeah. Well, we had the groups that we do. Um, we allow it's always going to be more women because
Mhm,
we're more emotional about it. We love to talk.
mhm.
But we're starting to see more males come and be a part of those groups.
Sure.
And I did one in 2019, and I had at least 8 or 9 men that came from a group. They're called our community elders, and
Uh,
they wanted to go through the grief recovery. And but we separated. We didn't have the men with the women. The men were in separate groups to talk with men, and women in a separate group to talk with women. But they want us to be able to do it together. But I
yes.
think based on what we feel in our community, it's best for us to keep it separated. Majority of the community might be able to do that,
Hmm.
but I think our African American males don't want that kind of interaction. Female. They don't want to look. I guess I'll say the word. They don't want to look weak.
Weak or soft,
So,
right?
so,
Yep.
so they could share with other males, which is good. So, and this grief recovery program is basically it was written by 2 Caucasian males, and we know that we have to have that we have to have the cultural relevance. So we've
Yeah.
had to change some things around.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
In terms of recovery, what are some steps that you might recommend for people who are dealing with grief and are not really sure how to deal with that?
Well, I would recommend. I really would like for folks to be able to go through, and I don't want to come off as selling this grief recovery method, but it's been one of the best that I've found. And most of it is 7 weeks, one-on-one or in a group. But for someone that is experiencing grief that may not have the opportunity to go through some kind of educational training, which the grief recovery program is to just sit down and journal those thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
Think about think about those losses, that they've experienced in their lives, and begin to talk about it. Get it on paper at least. Get it out of your heart and put it on paper because this grief thing is we need to take it from the head to the heart because the heart is the center of the matter. Being able to communicate things that you've never communicated before, and what we do with the process, you can share that. You can have a safe person to share those things with, because we just continue to understand that all incomplete grief is caused by undelivered emotional communications in 4 categories. It's apologies, and that's on our slide 11. Apologies, acknowledgement, in place of apologies sometimes, or in place of forgiveness, people just need to make some statements that either they feel it's harsh, but it's about getting that pain out. And then forgiveness, because this quote from Marion Williamson, unforgiveness is like drinking poison yourself and waiting for the other person to die. That,
Yes.
yes,
Yeah. Wow.
that is, that
Wow.
is powerful. So if you could find, find someone to discuss that with, a pastor or a good friend, but get those things out that you need to say in relation to if it's grief caused by death, if it's grief caused by divorce or some kind of relationship. It's still about trying to get those things out and say goodbye to pain.
I know that this conversation is could be much more expansive than we actually had time for. What are a couple of
Hmm.
things that are very, very important things that you want to make sure that that the viewers at least leave here understanding in terms of some kind
Hmm.
of action steps? I mean, you did talk about journaling and making sure you had someone you could talk to, but are there a couple of other things that you absolutely want to make sure that the viewers know to do to begin this journey?
Okay. Well, number one, I would say responsibility. And this is not responsibility for what has happened to you, but it's how you choose to respond to that event today. Otherwise, you remain a victim. If you're not willing to verbally uh, attest to your pain, then you remain a victim of your pain, and that's
Mm,
what we want to. That's what we want to be able to dismiss, is to say goodbye to that pain.
sure.
And recovery comes by learning to make small and positive changes in our attitudes, and then through our behaviors. We can choose to wallow in the pain that life has caused us, or we can choose to do something about it. And if we just keep walking around and acting like, I'm fine, because that's the word that people go to, and we define fine as feelings inside not expressed.
Mm,
And that's when you start to put on masks. You have a mask at work, you have a mask at church, you have a mask in the community, you have
right.
a mask in anything that you're involved in. And you hide behind that mask, and that mask is a mask of pain. And that's what we want people to be able to do. Identify it and make the effort to go through whatever steps, and we use the tools in grief recovery of the loss history graph, where we sit down and discuss, write down all the losses that occurred from our dawn of conscious memory, and then we identify those short-term energy relieving behaviors that we call STIRBs, because if we don't get the pain out, it's going to come out in other ways. It's
Yes.
going to
Yes.
come out in alcohol use, drug abuse, sexing. All of that stuff is a cover up for what we've experienced in our life. And I think our communities need to be inviting. Our communities need to start to talk about what grief looks like, and understand that, just like I said, the doctor asks you what your pain level is. We need to be asking our people, what is your grief level?
I think that's an
And
outstanding way of
allowing
looking
them
at
the
it.
space.
Yeah. Never thought about that. That's a great way to look at that.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
Because I had the statistics here from the workplace, and
Oh,
and,
right,
and
right.
it's glaring. It's glaring to see that performance in the workplace associated with grief. Do I have a minute to look
Sure.
at that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So under the terms here, grief can take its toll in all areas of our lives. In the workplace index, it said the defining grief as the normal and natural emotional reaction to the change or end in any familiar pattern. The study estimates that an average annual cost in lost productivity, lost business, and poor performance of more than $75 billion for all grief-induced experiences.
Wow.
46.9 billion is attributed to the death of a family member, colleague, friend, or even the animal companion. But we're going to consider the following. This was among 25,000 participants. 85% of management level decision makers indicated their decision making ranked from very poor to fair in the weeks or months following a grief incident that affected them. 90% of those in blue collar and other physical jobs indicated a much higher incidence of physical injuries due to reduced concentration in the weeks or months following a grief incident. When study participants were asked if their reduced ability to concentrate affected them for any period of time beyond any allowed bereavement time, in the case of a loved one, 75% indicated that reduced capacity affected them significantly beyond that time allotted for the leave. And you know that most of our HR policies allow for maybe 3 to 5 days
Right.
after you've had a loss. And of course, that 3 to 5 days, that grief experience is going to be with them for more than 3 to 5 days.
Absolutely.
And asked to estimate the amount of lost days they believe were the direct immediate result of their reduced focus, 50% reported at least 30 lost days in which their value to the company or business was dramatically reduced and may well have contained significant negative consequences in the form of poor decision making, poor supervisory skills, reduced sales ability, and increased workplace accidents and injuries.
Wow.
So, as I said before, if this is happening in the workplace, it's got to be happening in our homes and in our communities. And it goes back to that unresolved grief issue.
That's a lot. It's a lot to think about,
Yes,
to try to deal with, because
yes,
it follows you around. You don't leave it at home, or
you
leave it
can't
at the
leave it,
workplace, or it follows you around. Wow.
right? Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful, wonderful information. I am very appreciative that you had time. I was calling you Sheila at first, and then you told me that you were born in 1954, which is when my mother was born. So now I'm going to say Miss Sheila. Um, Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time. I know that we have slides available that we will at some point make available as well, so people can follow through with the information that you have. And I think your contact information is there as well. And
Yes,
any parting words that you'd like to leave us with, Ms. Sheila?
yes. I will. I first of all, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be on this call today, because I just believe the more that we talk about the grief issue and make it, normalize it as part of our life, that we could be better if we have those spaces in our community, allow those spaces for us to be able to communicate what's going on with us without any judgment, But I believe that we're going to have to, as a community, raise more awareness about the impact that grief has on our total community. Our children, our adults, all of them are going through something. And with this time of COVID that we've been in, it's been very, very difficult. We felt very hopeless, but we have to keep that hope alive, because if we lose hope, we don't have anything. You can live without water. I think there was a quote, you can live without water for so many days, you can live without this and that for so many days. But if we lose our hope, we're doomed.
Complete
So
agreement.
Yes. So just keep the conversation going in your workplace. You guys can set up opportunities, or if anyone wants to go through the grief recovery program, we have that available, and we also have When Children Grieve, and this is a education program that we teach the people that work with children.
Right.
We teach them how to work with them in grief.
Okay. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Had a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and look forward to learning more about how we deal with grief.
Yes, yes, and share. Hey, share the word around that
Absolutely.
it's there, and we need to recognize it so we can do better for our communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.